Hey everybody, Ron here. In the One Ring campaign, you'll be playing peoples of the West. Elves, dwarves, hobbits, Bjornings, and others as you explore into Eriador during the Third Age between the period of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, in a largely sandbox setting because there is not a whole lot clearly defined about Eriador during this setting, and I really like that. The game can be played with as few as 2 people, which is 1 player plus 1 lore master, or 1 person by themselves, which I'll talk about in another video, as with as many as 6 players or more. The book gives a basic short timeline from the events of The Hobbit all the way to the events of the beginning of this campaign, which starts approximately 30 to 35 years before the events of Lord of the Rings. So that's pretty nice. I really like the art in the book, and I'll be showing various pieces of art throughout this video, but this is basically what the game is all about. Now let's dig into the mechanics. So the game has some special dice. It has a D12 that is called the feat die, which is numbered from 1 to 10, and it has a special symbol, an Eye of Sauron, and a Gandalf symbol. The eye is basically a critical miss. It could be a 0 on your roll. The Gandalf is basically a critical hit. Something really special can happen with that. It's an automatic success. What I like about the game and the dice system is you roll that feat die plus a number of success dice equal to your skill. Say if you have a skill of 2 in stealth, you'll roll the feat die and the 2, what they call success dice, a D6, and you add that total together and compare it to your chest number. Your chest number is going to be based on your strength, heart, or wits, depending on what you're rolling. And if you roll a 6, that is considered a special success. On the dice, you will see a Tingwar symbol, and so that triggers some special results. You can get extra degrees of success. You can gain insight and do other cool things with the dice, and I like that. The game only encourages you to roll when there is danger, or if there's knowledge that can be obtained, but it's not immediately available, and if you're seeking to influence 1 or more uncooperative NPCs. And I really like that it explicitly spells this out, because it can be pretty easy to go into let's roll for everything mode, as modern role-playing games can tend to be if we're not careful. But this game really says, hey, wait, there has to be some consequence for it, and there has to be some real reason to roll the die. And that's a trend in modern RPGs and modern story-based RPGs that I really like. Combat is abstracted. Instead of counting squares or hexes, you basically have ranges. You have close combat and you have a range stance. And instead of declaring absolute position, you're declaring stances, which is basically the way that you choose to fight during combat. There are 4 stances: forward, open, defensive, which are all close combat stances, and finally rearward, which is your range stance. Forward is a more aggressive style where you'll get a bonus die, but close combat opponents get a bonus die as well. Open gives you no advantage or disadvantage, and of course defensive, close combat, you get a penalty die to your attack, but your opponents also get a penalty die, so that's pretty nice. And of course rearward is where you can only be targeted by ranged attacks, and you can only attack with ranged weapons. You can do some special combat tasks during combat depending on your stance. For example, in forward, you can intimidate foes by using awe to knock down the might of all the foes by 1, and you can subtract additional might as you get more successes. In defensive stance, you can protect your companions, and for rearward, you can prepare your shot so you can get a bonus die on your next attack. Pretty standard stuff in a sense, but also cool and story-based stuff. A combat goes like this. You'll have surprise attacks for adventurers who fail the awareness roll. They cannot participate in with the opening volley. or in the first close quarters round, which can be rough. The heroes can do the same thing if the adversaries fail in an awareness roll. But in a standard combat, you'll have opening volleys where anybody with ranged weapons can make ranged attacks, and then everybody closes in. The heroes declare their stances, and then the enemies engage with the different heroes, and off to the races you go. The combat goes in stance order: forward, then open, then defensive, then finally rearward, and then the bad guys go. So there's no rolling of initiative. You just get to go whenever your stance goes. And of course, you can change up your stance every round. So it becomes really dynamic. And I really like that. Combat, when you're rolling the dice, it's just like rolling skills. You roll the feat die and you roll success dice. And one thing I did not explain earlier is that if you have a favored roll, you can roll 2 feat dice and keep the higher. If you're ill-favored, you roll 2 dice and keep the lower. You can guess where that mechanic was inspired from, although that mechanic has been around for a while. I think D&D 5th edition has popularized it in more modern games, in my opinion. When you roll the 6 on the success dice, you can do special effects like doing extra damage. You can modify your parry rating, which is what opponents use to hit you. You can modify your feat die. If you get a 10 or Gandalf on the feat die, by the way, you get a piercing blow. So adding a bonus to the feat die would be a good thing for that. And there's other things that you can do. One thing I like about this, you can avoid damage by taking knockback. When you take knockback, you can take half damage. So that's nice. Maybe I'll put that in my D&D games. We'll see. And that's basically it with combat. I'm not going to go over every single little thing. I just wanted to give you an overview of the game to give you folks an idea of what it may play like at the table. You have 2 phases in the game. You have the fellowship phase and the adventuring phase. The fellowship phase is your downtime where you can, recover, gather new rumors, meet up with your patron, which can be pretty important in the game for your fellowship, which is what they call your adventuring party, and so on and so forth. And then once a year, you have a Yule season fellowship phase where you can do some end of year stuff that's pretty big, like heal a shadow scar. I haven't talked about the shadow yet, but that's coming. You have your really codified downtime with the fellowship phase, which is nice. In the adventuring phase, of course, you can do the combat and delve ruins and so on and so forth. But one thing that's big in Lord of the Rings is the journeys and how Tolkien likes to describe everything and all the trials that the fellowship goes through during the journey. So you have a journey phase where each of the players will declare a role, and throughout there you'll handle different events based on how well ultimately the guide rolls. And then you can do things like use a skill to explore, use awareness to be a lookout, and there's different types of journey events. For example, you can get a ill choices result, which is if the roll fails, the target will gain 1 shadow point. Each of these challenges in the journey, you will accumulate fatigue. Fatigue temporarily adds to your load, and so if your endurance is at or below your current load rating, you become weary. And weary is bad because when you're rolling the success dice, you ignore 1s, 2s, or 3s. That could be a very bad thing. Also, during the adventuring phase, you can do councils. Councils are your extended role-playing scenes where you set a resistance, how many successes you have to get in X amount of attempts. The characters will use different skills to interact with NPCs that you're trying to influence, or maybe even the audience. Like you can use Enhearten, Insight, Persuade, so on and so forth. There is a success trigger and also a failure trigger, depending on how well or poorly you do. And so, you can see, like in the 2 Towers, you have the Fellowship going to Medicel to basically have a council with Theoden, and Theoden is being possessed by Saruman and all that stuff that goes on. It's really cool. That's a council. That's an example of a council. Also, the Council of Elrond is an example of a council. So you can see how that works, and you can see how the mechanics of the game ties very closely to what actually happens in the books. I think I'm going to end this video right there. I mean, there's so much more that I could talk about, but I don't want this to go on, and this gives you a basic overview on how the game works, and hopefully you will go and check it out. Of course, there's the core book. There's also the starter set, which is set in the Shire and mostly has Hobbit pre-gens, so it's a little bit more lighthearted. Either way you go, you'll have a great time. Thank you, folks, for sticking around, and until next time, see you later.